the environment too.
My Lords, it's a great pleasure to follow the noble lady Baroness Parmenter, and I share the noble Lord Lord Young's disappointment that we're not going to hear from the noble Lord Holmes, being someone who also knows that problem of running between two chambers all too well. I sympathise. I don't feel like I need to add anything on the child poverty point from the three powerful initial speeches. Really, all one can say is you hope that the government in both chambers in this parliament was listening to those three speeches, or at least reads those three speeches, because really, how could it not act on the basis of them? I just basically want to focus on three amendments: 8, adding climate emergency as missions, the Net Zero Amendment 18, and 19, reference to the Environment Act. And I want to, whilst broadly supporting what the noble Lord Stunnell said, in some ways slightly disagree with him, because he says he can't imagine a government that doesn't have a net zero by 2050 target. Well, I can imagine, I know that we need a government that has a target for net zero long before 2050, and indeed that needs to explore very closely that phrase net zero and what exactly it means. That's a friendly disagreement, I perhaps should add. And I also am not quite sure that I agree with the noble Lord Stunnell that net zero should not be sitting there as a target on its own. As the noble Lord was speaking, I couldn't help but think about the often repeated phrase about what's not being measured isn't being prioritised. And if it's across all of the targets, and indeed I very much agree that it does apply across all of the targets, then is there a risk that it kind of just disappears into the yes, we'll put a few nice words in without really putting the counting in there, that we're seeing from local councils, so many of whom have declared a climate emergency and indeed a nature crisis, are showing that local councils are desperate to do that, to be able to show their own contribution. But I think a lot of our discussion about the climate emergency has focused on mitigation and the possibilities of mitigation, and I think it is important to put that in the current global context where we see both the United States and the European Union, particularly the US leading the EU trying to follow, putting massive sums of investment into what's loosely called the green economy. And if we think about the government and its desire, often expressed to be world leading, there has been a real change in the global context just in the last few months. And on that light, I want to particularly focus, and picking up a point from the noble lady Baroness Parmenter, most of the talk has been on climate mitigation. I think when we're particularly talking about what's commonly described as left behind communities, as we were talking in the last group about rural and coastal communities, the issues of adaptation and resilience to the climate emergency really need to be highlighted. And again, here we speak in the week when the UN Security Council had its first ever debate on the impacts of sea level rise. And we've just in the last day or so seen some, I have to say, truly terrifying research coming out about the weakness of ice sheets that have the potential to cause massive sea level rise. And as I was sitting here thinking about this, I was thinking about a visit I made to a small rural village town called Hemsby in 2014, after it had been hit by a storm and a number of homes had been swept away. And I just looked up Hemsby and realised that this year 3 times again, Hemsby has been hit by serious storms. And again, the lifeboats lost its ramp again and again and again. And communities like Hemsby, if we think about places that desperately need support in the climate emergency, places like Hemsby have to be at the forefront. And I think we haven't really heard much discussion in this debate, and I'm not sure whether this needs to be a separate mission. Again, it needs to be across all of the missions, is the issue of resilience, of making sure that everything we're aiming to invest in and build can stand up to shocks, climate shocks and other shocks, when we live in this age of shocks. So just one final point too, and a number of people have made this point about the interaction of human health and well-being and environment. And I don't know if the noble lady the Minister is aware, and I will point this to her as a constructive suggestion of the UN project, the Healthy Urban Microbiome Initiative, known as HUMI, which really focuses on how human well-being benefits from a healthy environment, even in the most concentrated urban settings. A more biodiverse setting, even on the busiest urban street, is better for human well-being. And that's something that really does have to underpin everything the government is doing and thinking about here.
My